Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Mastering Diagnostics. My name's Brandon Steckler, technical editor of Motor Age magazine, and today we are going to discuss leveraging the lab scope for pesky intermittent parasitic drains. Now here's why I mention this. Not many people would think of leveraging a lab scope for parasitic drain diagnosis, but the point is many times, especially nowadays, with how vehicles are networked, there are layers upon layers upon layers of confusion and networking and configuration in these vehicles. And the idea, of course, is to make these vehicles lighter and to more easily implement systems into vehicle platforms, more like a plug and play type situation. Meaning, if we have these networks structured in these vehicles, the infrastructure is there, and we can simply introduce new systems and new components relatively seamlessly. And with the fact that networks now carry information, we can save money, time, and weight hardwiring components. Networks can share information from one system to another. For instance, I can have a sun load sensor in a dashboard, and that sun load sensor sensing sun intensity. We can leverage that for daytime running lamps, but we could also leverage that in the HVAC system. So rather than having multiple sun load sensors, for instance, going to several systems with several bunches of wires in separate wire harnesses, we can have one sensor going to one computer or node on a network and simply have that node share information with another node on the same network, or perhaps through a gateway, a computer that communicates on more than one network. It communicates by speaking more than one language. But I don't want to get too far off topic here. I just want to set the stage for why I brought up networks. The point is information being shared on these networks comes in different, I'll describe it as different levels. My point is we've got very high-speed networks that share information at a very high rate of speed or baud rate because a lot of them tend to be mission critical. And for instance, we certainly don't want any latency or delay in deployment of a supplemental inflatable restraint, right? If somebody is involved in an accident, a collision of some sort, that airbag, that inflator has to deploy instantaneously in fractions upon fractions of a second. So we need a very high rate of speed. And the same holds true with today's ADAS systems, forward-facing camera, radar, brake mitigation, things of that nature. They have to communicate at a very high rate of speed to accomplish these goals in a safe fashion. But something like a security system doesn't necessitate speed, right? If somebody tampers with a door handle, it really doesn't matter if that door handle indicates the door is being tampered with in milliseconds or microseconds or several seconds, right? There's no need for that speed. So for that reason, engineers designed these systems to operate on different bus speeds. Why? Why can't we have everything communicate at a high rate of speed? That costs money. So if we can accomplish our goals the way we need to and save money, by we, I mean manufacturers, we're certainly going to do that. And I bring that up for a point as well. Our security systems don't reside necessarily on a high-speed network. They might reside on a medium-speed CAN bus, something that operates significantly slower. And a lot of those buses, I will use the terminology sleep with one eye open. And here's what I'm getting at. If a security system, picture a guard standing there monitoring the vehicle for being tampered with, he certainly can't fall asleep, because if he goes to sleep entirely, he's going to miss somebody trying to break into the vehicle. But at the same time, he can't be up marching around because he's using energy or battery power, and that will deplete the battery quite quickly. So these medium speed CAN buses tend to sleep with one eye open. Now, why do I mention that? Specifically, this could happen on any vehicle, but specifically on some of the higher end vehicles, mainly some European makes and models. One of the nodes, for instance, on a beacon network, for some reason, for some way, shape, or form, gets disturbed in the middle of its slumber. And the point is that thing, when it gets woken up out of its slumber, out of its state of sleep, if you will, it creates a disturbance on the rest of the bus and wakes up all the other nodes on the network. And the point is, when these nodes are awake, they're using battery power. And what happens is frequently and very intermittently at the same time, a car will be placed into the driveway or into the garage or into the parking lot with seemingly nothing wrong at all, only for the customer to wake up the next morning or Monday morning after a long weekend to find that the battery is in a depleted state. Maybe the car won't even start at all. And you know the story from here. We bring the car to the shop, the technician evaluates it, and unable to replicate concern. It's nothing but a dead battery. They jump it, they charge it. The battery tests fine, the charging system tests fine, and there's seemingly nothing wrong, meaning not even a parasitic drain is measurable outside of what we call normal. Unfortunately, the car is returned to the customer at that point in time with no problem found, only several weeks later to have that same problem, that same symptom repeat itself. And this leads to tons of frustration, not only for the customer, but for the technician as well. So to alleviate that problem, we have to be able to capture the fault, right? We're aware the battery's dead. We know there's a problem. We may even decide the car does have a parasitic drain and we've got to find it. But if the drain isn't present, your guess is as good as mine regarding what the source of that drain is. So what can we do? We need to strategize on how to capture this information. But the point is we can't capture this information if the problem isn't present. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not going to sit in the garage overnight and wait for a problem to happen and watch it with my own eyes. And this is where the power of a lab scope, specifically a PC-based lab scope like that of Pico 4425A, the hardware of the scope, along with the software, will allow us to capture information over a ton of time, days of time, if we choose to structure it that way. And if this information is being recorded, we simply go and find the fault and reference the information at the point that fault occurs. And there's a problem with that too. Even if I capture the fault over days and days of screen recording, how much time would it take to sift through that information to find when the fault actually set? That would be very time consuming as well. So for that reason, we are going to leverage several awesome features of the Pico 4425A when coupled with the Pico 7 software, known as Actions. Now, Actions is an automated way of providing a command to the scope on first of all, the information you're going to capture on one of or all four channels of the scope, when to capture it, but most importantly, what to do when this fault is present. By leveraging the Actions feature of the scope along with a trigger, we can provide insight to the scope on when to capture the information and what to do with it once that fault is present. For instance, we can program the Actions feature to stop recording, to then save the entire file, and after that to restart the scope again for a subsequent capture in case a subsequent fault occurs. All this can be conducted seamlessly and automated while we sleep. All we have to do is keep the scope powered up via our PC connected to a charger and allow the tools to do the rest of the work for us. I've rented myself a 2025 Volkswagen Jetta, and I'm going to demonstrate out in the shop on how to go about setting up the scope strategically to capture a fault. And what you'll notice about my approach is once I show you the wiring diagram, you're going to be blown away about how much how much circuitry there is involved. What we can see here, and I will zoom in momentarily, is 5 specific screens simply demonstrating power distribution to this vehicle. Meaning everything you see on this screen right here has a potential to create a parasitic drain and discharge the battery, deplete it of its stored electrons, leaving the vehicle dead when the customer approaches it. But if we take the time to analyze our diagram, we'll realize that our battery source right here has only a few pathways for current flow, main pathways for current flow to travel throughout the rest of this vehicle's electrical infrastructure. So rather than approaching the vehicle as a whole and being totally overwhelmed or trying to troubleshoot this fault at random, we can strategize and capture the fault initially. Right here at this fuse panel A located in the left side of the engine compartment behind the driver's headlamp. One of 5 pathways is the source of parasitic drain. So instead of attacking the whole vehicle, we will simply limit the fault to one of 5 pathways. Now, considering the scope has 4 channels, 4 distinct channels to capture information from simultaneously, depending on the hardware you have at your disposal, I could choose to implement 4 different amp probes simultaneously. And of those 5 potential fault regions, if that's what you want to call it, I could capture 4 simultaneously to determine which of the paths I am not going to waste time troubleshooting down, heading down. Meaning, which circuits are good on the vehicle, which circuits are not my problem, leaving only the potentially faulted circuit and the related sub-circuits from then on. So again, rather than approaching the whole vehicle, we are going to leverage service information, the picoscope and its capture capability, along with a couple of amp probes to determine which of those 5 circuits possesses the current flow during the parasitic drain. When we come over to the vehicle with our amp probe, we are going to be capturing current flow, leaving the battery. We're going to be using that current flow as an indicator that a problem is present. When the problem is present on the first channel, what we call channel A, what you will see in blue, in channel B, we are trying to answer the question, where is the problem? Which path does the problem reside? So channel A tells us there's a problem, and channel B is going to tell us, is the problem in this circuit, yes or no? In this circuit, yes or no? This one, and this one, and this one. And whichever circuit houses the fault, that is the circuit we are going to pursue. And we are going to ignore the other ones, potentially saving us literally weeks of time, because every one of these components, every one of these components is capable of creating parasitic draw. And it's one thing to approach a problem that is present, but when you are trying to approach a problem that is intermittent, it becomes extremely difficult and frustrating, time-consuming, and costs a lot of money. And that's even if you find the problem. So let's head out to the car to get an idea of how we're going to implement what we've learned in service information. And I'm going to show you how I leverage the Pico 4425A, along with, we're going to be leveraging just 2 amp probes. And we're simply going to be proving a point. Now, to be totally transparent, this vehicle, this 2025 Volkswagen Jetta, does not have a problem. So I'm going to simulate a fault. I'm going to create a parasitic drain by energizing the power C. But we're going to pretend we don't know that. We're going to show how the tool demonstrates the problem for us. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about how we can implement the actions features we discussed earlier. So as promised, we're out at the car now, and we're going to strategize, as discussed, by connecting an amp probe to first the battery output. That's our heavy red cable right here.
And of course, that's going to lead to the front portion of fuse box A. This is where battery voltage and current comes into the box. And it's split among these 5 remaining terminals, and the question becomes, which of these 5 remaining terminals is the circuit that houses the current draw? Without taking anything apart, we can strategize by leveraging the amp clamps along with the scope to give us graphed out data over time, and sometimes this time frame could be several hours to even overnight. And we all know with intermittent problems, especially with some of these European vehicles, chasing parasitic drains can be somewhat of a nightmare. So again, we're going to leverage our scope. We're going to put 1 amp probe here to prove the current flow is present. And we are going to leverage several amp clamps around these remaining cables to find out which one houses the draw. And the idea is divide and conquer. Rather than tackling the whole vehicle in its entirety, we're breaking the electrical system up into subcategories to find out which of these 5 portions houses the drain.
So this is the Picoscope 4425A multi-trace lab scope.
And among other capabilities this scope boasts, what I want to show you here, what this does is allow us to carry information from the device we're using, in this case some amp clamps, to the scope just as any other scope operates. But what's unique about this is this also not only powers up these devices, so we're no longer changing 9-volt batteries in these things every time we forget to turn the switch off, but it also allows this tool to communicate with these, and they self-identify. So when I connect it to my scope, my software is going to identify what probe I'm using, which really makes things pretty neat. But again, the reason why I'm mentioning this today is not so much those cool capabilities, but the fact that it's powered by the device itself. As long as I leave my laptop computer charged up, I can let this sit for hours and hours and hours and hours waiting for a fault to happen, and it will capture everything for me. And all we simply have to do is connect the connector to the interface here, and it'll self-identify. So I call this the wheel of misfortune. We've got our high amp probe, our primary amp probe leaving the battery as our trigger, our indicator that a problem is present. And our first capture yielded us no current flow in this circuit here. So we're just going to try one of the other ones. And this black one right here looks like a nice candidate. It's right next door, easy to get to. I'll move my amp probe there. And we are going to repeat the process. And we're simply going to capture the data. What I want to see is when this amp probe shows current flow, will this amp probe show current flow or not? If the answer is no, we relocate this to a different one of these wires until we find the one that shows the current flow. So we're going to leverage this one as a trigger, an indicator that a problem is present. And we're going to leverage this one to say, is the problem present in the wire we're referencing? And if not, we move it till we find the wire that does house the problem. Again, breaking this down into 5 easy to follow sections rather than tackling the whole car at once. So we got lucky. Here in this capture, I'll zoom in a little bit tighter and we will analyze this at our office later on. But channel A in blue is our primary amp probe, one indicating a problem is present, and our secondary amp probe is showing us current flow in the same circuit that we are referencing right now. So when current flows through the battery cable, through our primary current amp clamp, the secondary amp clamp here is showing current in this circuit as well. So instead of troubleshooting this entire vehicle via these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circuits, we only have to focus on this one right here. and we'll reference our wiring diagram and service information and see where it leads.
Revisiting our wiring diagram is always recommended, especially in this case, because we've got a lot of ground to cover here. So we've successfully eliminated 4 of the 5 potential sources of current flow, technically 5 of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This black wire right here is the one that houses the current flow, which matches this. So as current leaves the battery, that high current flow we saw left the fuse box at SA4, fuse number 4, the 80 amp circuit, and it leads to fuse panel C, which is found on diagram 4 of 6. So all we're simply going to do is go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And here's the continuation from B. So B feeds all of these circuits here and here. And we are going to reference the bottom of the left end of dash at fuse panel C to find the wire that B continues on.
So we did some service information research and found that heavy black cable that houses our fault leads directly to fuse box C, located right here just underneath the dash. So rather than troubleshooting the whole vehicle, trying to find this parasitic drain intermittently, we strategized, we leveraged the tools to eliminate 4/5 of the vehicle. And now we were only on this circuit. So let's take a look. I apologize, we're crawling under the dash here. This black wire right here leads to this fuse box. Now we just simply have to eliminate fuses. And that's a process of referencing service information and seeing which circuits are supplied current via this black wire.
Reviewing our capture, we're showing, of course, current flow leaving the battery in blue and simultaneously current flow leaving fuse box A in red. And of course, they line up, proving that not only do we have a draw, but the draw is in fact of the wire that we are referencing at the time, that black wire leaving SA4 of the underhood fuse box. Now, there's some clues to be yielded here. Of course, I created this fault, but let's pretend I didn't, just for several minutes, to prove a point. Being just familiar with DC motors and such, I recognize this capture as a DC motor with an inrush current of about 10 amps and running current of roughly 4 amps. Zooming in further, we can actually see the motor armature turning and it repeating itself over and over again. And the reason why I bring this up, the reason why it's important is I don't take things at face value. I like to squeeze as much juice out of the berry as I can. So when I'm evaluating information like this, I want to see if there's any clues that are going to save me time in the long run. And in this case, if we go back and reference our diagram, what we've shown here, let me zoom out a little bit to make this easier to navigate. Of course, this is our battery, our source, and current flow can only go in several places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We had our blue trace reference to battery output, and we had our red trace reference to fuse 4, SA4 output, which of course leads to fuse panel C on page 4. So there's page 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course, this is fuse panel C, the one at the bottom of the lower left side of the dashboard in the vehicle. And this is the cable, the black cable you saw me point to when we crawled beneath the dashboard. Now, you might be looking at this and going, okay, we did save a little bit of time. We've eliminated 5 out of 6 main circuits, but look at all these components on here, Brandon. It's still going to take us time to figure that out. And that's the whole reason I pointed to the waveform we captured, the fact that it is a DC motor. Now, we can look at these and continuation H. This leads to the security system, right? The access and start system interface. And letter L leads to a USB charging socket. So our current draw from a DC motor is not going to go there. And if we look at the rest of the items on this list, this is a vacuum pump relay. That could certainly cause a current draw that represents a DC motor. But the rest of these don't lead to a DC motor. In fact, there's only a couple down here that do. We've got our sunroof control module, our left rear window motor, our driver's seat control module, and related components of that driver's seat. So there really is only 2 or 3 circuits supporting what we see here as far as the operation of a DC motor, meaning we don't have to check all 15 or 20 of these, only the 3 that would produce a DC motor output. So that approach is a real time saver if you take the time to understand what the tools do and how to leverage them to your advantage. It does take some practice, especially taking the time to sit back and analyze things like that scope capture, proving it was a DC motor. That saved me a lot of time potentially in the real world if we were really chasing a problem like that. Now, I want to remind you, I created this fault simply to demonstrate the use of the amp probes on multiple channels, not just one amp probe, but multiple. And if I had more at hand, I would implement more. The more amp probes I can deploy simultaneously, the less moving around of those amp probes I would have to do. But again, the point was I was trying to simulate a load so it could be witnessed on not one, but both scope channels. And in honesty, what I did was I reached through the window and I bumped the power seat fore aft motor switch. But I want to show you something different where this becomes tremendously more powerful in more of a real world situation. We've got a newer model Toyota truck, and we're monitoring the amp probes very similarly to how I did today, except rather than bump a seat switch necessarily, what we've done is we've walked over and we've grabbed the outer door handle and we've woken up the medium speed CAN bus network, the body bus, to simulate a parasitic drain that could happen if we had a handle that was going wonky. Maybe it had some water ingress and was going nuts every now and then. So I do want to show you a little bit of a video and a walkthrough of a capture we did. So the first thing we're going to want to do is set up our channels appropriately. We've labeled them, one at the battery, one at the passenger compartment fuse box, and of course we're going to be watching our body CAN network for an inadvertent wake-up signal. Next is to set up the actions we talked about. Now the actions will let us determine what the scope is going to do once our trigger threshold has been crossed. As you can see here, we've set the trigger level for 200 milliamps. Now, the significance of that number is we like to choose about 2 to 4 times the quiescent or normal vehicle draw. So if a vehicle draws 50 milliamps normally, 50 milliamps times 4 is about 200. So that allows us to determine if a draw is present. That's what we're going to trigger off of. So we're going to set it for every capture so we can fill up the buffer accordingly. And that's what we're seeing there, 1 capture per buffer screen. Now comes to add the actions. This is going to allow us to first stop the capture. We're going to add a second action to save that capture. And I do want to make a point here that this is going to use a lot of hard drive space if this continued to capture and capture and capture. So if you can imagine, currently we only have 10 seconds per division, but we like to send something like 500 seconds per division. So we get tons of time, hours and hours on the screen. And if this thing captured hours and hours of data over and over again, we could very quickly fill the hard drive up. So we only want to capture as necessary and remember to shut off this feature when we are done. So after we've gotten past that warning, we're going to name our capture. And by name, I mean label the file as we save it. So we'll save it in an appropriate folder that we decide we want to place it. In this case, we've named it Draw Test. And now it's time to get the ball rolling once we've verified our actions are in place the way we want them. So right now we are waiting for the trigger threshold to get crossed. And again, I mentioned we have 10 seconds per division and very low sample rate because it doesn't take much scope resolution to draw a straight line, but typically we have this set at much higher numbers for more capture time. Now, this is where we approached the vehicle and placed our hand on the handle. And what we're showing here is simultaneous to our current draw was our network wake-up signal on our B-CAN bus showing activity. So the activity is what caused the draw. And right now we've gone from a very quiet vehicle to one that is currently causing a draw. Now, if this were to continue frequently, several times within a minute or two overnight, we can quickly see that the battery will go dead. But the point is, we are not babysitting this vehicle. This vehicle will be sitting in the shop overnight, and the scope will be monitoring this vehicle's activity overnight. And because we've set up our scope to capture accordingly, all of these faults that are being experienced are going to be captured within the hard drive of the computer so we can review them later. So this is almost like having one of those critter cameras in the woods on a hunter's property. We can see problems even when we're not there. And we'll see once we get to the end of the screen here, since we've crossed the trigger threshold, the actions feature is going to stop the file. Stop the buffer, save the file. And as soon as it's done saving, it's going to restart the capture to make the scope ready for yet another failure capture once it crosses the trigger threshold.
So as you can see, lab scopes and current probes, they have their place, and they're not always the be-all end-all, but they're a fantastic tool. And if you learn what tools can do and can't do and learn to leverage them properly, they could save you a lot of time, just as we did here. This 2025 Volkswagen with an intermittent parasitic drain could have been anywhere in this car. But using our tools and using our head, dividing and conquering. Rather than looking at the whole car, we went right here and figured out preliminarily, which of these 5 circuits, yes, there's 6 here, one's an input, which of these 5 circuits houses the fault. Once we eliminated it down to one of the 5, we simply followed that, leveraging service information. It's as simple as that.